Welcome everyone this evening to the PD session on expanding and securing the teaching of African American literature. I am Dr. Vincent Price, and I will be guiding you through this exploration this evening. So if you have any questions, feel free to put them in the chat. It's a small enough group, you can even unmute yourself and ask, and I'll do my best to provide an answer for you. So here is our destination, our roadmap is pretty simple. I'll tell you a little bit about me, and just so you'll know who I am. And then we'll shift into understanding the why behind this push for expanding and securing the African American literature teaching, and then looking forward to, or moving forward to, how to actually do it. It's enough to talk about the importance, but it's not enough to talk about the importance. It's another thing though, to actually push forward and start to implement it, or see ways of implementing it. So having said that, by the time this session wraps up, hopefully you'll be walking away with a few things. One of those will be examples of Black literature to add to your classroom. Another would be shared strategies for teaching Black literature. We'll be sharing ideas as teachers, as educators, as professionals. And then also towards the end, a pedagogical strategy or approach for expanding the presence of Black literature in the classroom. So let us proceed. So again, I'm Dr. Vincent Price. I come from a family of educators, and my mother went to school for, well, she has a degree in home economics education. My sisters teach or have taught. I have a series of great aunts and uncles who are in education or who were in education. My great grandmother started her own kindergarten. So education runs through my veins. I'm also an amateur tap dancer, and then I've also taught English. I'm a former English and French teacher for over 5 years, teaching in Mississippi and also Little Rock, Arkansas. Received my bachelor's in English with licensure from the University of Southern Mississippi, and both my master's and my PhD from the University of Tennessee in Knoxville, Tennessee, focusing on English education. Just in case I happen to say something that really inspires you, that really ignites you, and provokes you to move in a positive direction, feel free to take a snapshot or take a picture of that slide and post it to Instagram. Let other people know what they missed out on, brag a little bit. And if you do that, just tag me. My Instagram is @DrPriceTeaches. It's always nice to know when there's something that I've provided that others find some value in. So don't hesitate to do that. I have no qualms about it. So that's Dr. Price Teaches. And you can also follow me on the way through that. So we're going to start off with a question. I like to have engagement throughout presentations rather than just full-on lectures. So be prepared for that. And we're going to stay within the Zoom. So we're not going to be linking back and forth between things. But my question to you is, why did you register for this particular workshop? Okay, whatever your reason is, your motivation, your expectation is, take some time to add that to the chat, share that in the chat. Be honest and open. Understanding our whys is going to help me figure out how to present certain pieces of information to you. So take some time right now in the chat to share why you registered for this particular workshop. Okay. Thank you, Melissa. Interested in professional development in the state of Arkansas. Uh, we have credit hours, of course, PD. We also have you feel the importance of encouraging or promoting African American literature as an African American person as well. Always looking to add more diversity to your high school library and helping teachers um, install those into their teaching. Okay, fantastic. All right, 1, 2, 3, 4. Okay, let's move on. Fantastic. So thank you for those who shared, and let's move on. So we're going to continue with the why. So and collaboration, fantastic. So we have this whole idea of why are we even trying to expand or secure the teaching of African American literature? What's pushing us to do that? And so I think for this case, it's going to be strong or powerful to explain this why or explore this why through experiences. So I'm going to share the experiences from one person, then share my own experiences, and we'll see how these things stitch together to answer this question of why. So the first is coming from Nicole Hannah Jones, specifically from her preface to the 1619 Project. And in this preface, she's discussing her younger days when she was in either high school or junior high. I think it's high school, and specifically history or the history of social studies classes, so not English per se. So she says, Black people, however, were largely absent from the histories I read. We appeared only where unavoidable. Slavery was mentioned briefly in the chapter on this nation's most deadly war, and then Black people disappeared again for a full century until magically reappearing as Martin Luther King Jr. gave a speech about a dream. Second passage. The world revealed to me through my education was a white one. At school, I searched desperately to find myself in the American story we were taught, to see my humanity, our humanity, reflected back to me. And the last, sitting in that class each day, I felt as if I had spent my entire life struggling to breathe, and someone had finally provided me with oxygen. I feel a pang of embarrassment now when I recall my surprise that so many books existed about Black people and by Black people, that Black people had so much history that could be learned. I'm not going to say too much about her experience that has not already been conveyed in her powerful words. All that I will say is that the stories captured in the histories in her history class pack a punch. They have power. The presence or the lack or the absence has power to it. And we're going to continue with that idea as we go through this session, thinking about representation, thinking about presentation. So, and here's me. That's me in the middle and my two sisters on the outside. So I am a product of Mississippi, born and raised in Mississippi, and a product of a single parent home. My mother, my parents divorced when I was in kindergarten, and my mother raised me and my siblings. And she really encouraged us to excel. She molded us to excel, not just as people in general, but as Black people. And so I ultimately ended up in gifted education, starting in elementary school and going all the way into uh, to high school with honors and AP classes. And it was in those classes that I started to realize something. I started to recognize that I was often the only representative, the only Black, the only male, um, the only Black male, and and I realized something else because of that. With my absence from those programs or from those classes, there wouldn't be any kind of representation for African Americans or for African American males. Um, I also realized that my presence dictated a great deal how others might perceive African Americans because I was the only one. So I had to. That it was a lot to weigh on uh, to carry, but and I don't think that I carried it as much as I realize it now, but it really did influence how I carried myself and the importance of presence, which I continue to focus on. As I told you before, I come from a family of educators, and educated people like to stress the importance of reading, the importance of education. So I had plenty access to books. And so when I went into teaching, I wanted to provide the same thing to my students. To say a little bit more about me, I also am a product of African Methodist Episcopal Church, AME Church. And the story behind the AME, the creation of the AME, is that it is a product really of racial intolerance or discrimination. When white Methodists essentially pushed out the Black Methodists or limited their access to worship. And so the African Methodist Episcopal Church started from that. So this upbringing, this religious upbringing was framed in knowledge of my history, of African American history. So when we did Founders Day, talking about the history each year, I was reminded of that. Coming from a family of Black educators, I was also reminded of deeper histories outside of the church, dealing with slavery, dealing with discrimination, independence, freedom, liberty, and opportunity, and to make sure that I take the opportunity to excel. So all of this knowledge of who I am, how I'm seeing myself as a person and as a Black person is molding this positive self-image. And so I took it upon myself, similar to what one of you said, I took it upon myself when I went into the classroom to try to recreate that for my students, specifically for my Black students, to make sure that they had access to books, they had access to a positive self-image, they had access to an understanding of who they were as well. So through that, when I walked into the classroom that first time, I took the textbook and I tried to find every Black piece of Black literature that was there, because for me, it was necessary. Necessary for me to encounter it, and also necessary for me to bring it to the students in my classroom. So having said all that, I want you to think about your experience with Black literature, whether we're talking about reading the literature or teaching the literature. So in the chat, give me one word. If you want to hyphenate it, that's fine. One word that connects or characterizes your experience with Black literature. For me, I would say necessary. So what's one word that you would use that connects to your experience? All right. Words like history, transforming. Okay. Nice word. Larissa, would you mind um, sharing why you chose the word transforming for us? Inclusion.
Okay. Hi.
Hi.
I chose transforming because the more that I read literature about Black authors or that have Black characters in them, it helps me to see how um, just different nuances of the Black experience in life because it's, you know, I might be living one experience, but an author might connect me with another experience that exists in, other states or
Mhm.
in countries or whatever. And I love for my students to pick up on that and for them to see that, just because you live in the area that you live in or the blocks that you live in, guess what? There are all kinds of people living all kinds of experiences out here. And for them to connect with characters that either mirror them or characters that help them to think about other ways of doing things or, just in general, just, hey, it's transforming their
Mm.
thoughts and their minds.
Wow.
Oh, that was good, but okay.
Yeah, that was fantastic. Thank you. Thank you. And I love what you said about the fact that you have access to so many different experiences uh, through the pieces of literature. They're not all going to be presenting that same experience because they're coming from different lifestyles, different times, and just different perspectives. So it's important to not only, as you said, not only expose the students to that, to these various experiences, but also expand their experiences, expand their world. Fantastic. So we have transforming, history, inclusion, church-based. All right. Thank you. Before I move on, would anyone else wish to share why they chose the word that they chose?
Uh, yes, this is Melissa. I
Yeah.
just wanted to share, Dr. Price, why, because that was the church was the basis on where I received my foundation.
Hmm.
Because at the time that I was a student in school, I didn't see very much of it in literature, but the surrounding churches in my town, they got together, and in other towns, they got together and brought us together, and we celebrated Black History Month. So that was pretty much my exposure to literature. But as I began to teach, it ignited something because I was building off those experiences in the limited access that I had in the schools. So it motivated me to want to dig deeper and take that into the classroom.
All right. Thank you. Words, you can never go wrong when you have to use words like motivate and ignite. There's just something about the literature, something about our encountering with that literature that compels us to move in a certain way, move in a certain direction. Um, so fantastic. Thank you. All right, let's move on. Okay. So literature is important. Um, as I'm sure you all have recognized, it's about that presence and being represented because representation is important. And but we're going to take a slightly deeper dive into why that representation is important. So back in 2009. Nigerian novelist Chimamanda Adichie gave a TED Talk. I love this TED Talk. I've used this TED Talk ever since I listened to it for the first time because there's so much power to it. But I'm going to share a snippet, 2 snippets of this TED Talk with you right now. And so in this TED Talk, Adichie is talking about the importance of representation, specifically the impact or the danger of the single story. And so in this first clip, she's going to kind of explain what the single story is and how that, and what the single story is. And the second one, we'll be talking about how that single story is really created, what's really driving that. So here we go.
I realized that I had been so immersed in the media coverage of Mexicans that they had become one thing in my mind, the abject immigrant. I had bought into the single story of Mexicans, and I could not have been more ashamed of myself. So that is how to create a single story. Show a people as one thing, as only one thing, over and over again, and that is what they become.
So we have that repetition. So, so representation. So who is being represented and how are they being represented? Okay, that second how. So if we are constantly bringing in pieces of Black literature, fantastic. They have your representation, or the presence. But then when you have every piece of those texts always portraying African Americans in that slave context. So then you have the single story. Then you have African Americans seen as and only as slaves. Okay, so that's the single story that we have to challenge, and we have to add some elements to, some dimensions to. The creation of it and what drives it is what Adichie is going to go into next. Here we go, next.
Like our economic and political worlds, stories too are defined by the principle of Nkali. How they are told, who tells them, when they are told, how many stories are told, are really dependent on power. Power is the ability not just to tell the story of another person, but to make it the definitive story of that person.
So we have this idea of power. And it's a powerful thing. We might think of literature bringing in a certain different stories just to bring in different experiences. But I think as all of you have connected with, and especially with that word transformative, we see the power in this, in access to this literature. There's power that comes with access to it, and there's a great amount of power that comes from the lack of access. What are the students being exposed to? Which stories are they seeing? Which lives or portrayal of those lives are they seeing? It's all a power move. There's certain pieces that are in classrooms, that are certain pieces that are really pushed, certain ones that aren't. You have the critical race theory, in quotation marks, ban to pull certain stories out or certain portrayals, representations out. That's a power move. So it's a power play. And so when we're talking about bringing more literature in and diverse literature in and securing that literature, we have to be strategic because it is challenging that dynamic. So we have to make sure that we do it with skill and So we have this idea. We have to bring in multiple stories, not just the same type of story, not just African Americans struggling with civil rights, African Americans struggling with slavery, so on and so forth. We have to have all these dimensions to carry all of these experiences, because stories are more than just stories. Literature is more than literature. It's more than just a character, some character in some setting dealing with some conflict and there's some resolution. It goes deeper than that. And so stories play a deeper part. So back in 1990, Rudine Sims Bishop penned an article that really speaks to the role that stories play, the deeper role that stories play. She says, literature transforms, there's the word again, transforms human experience and reflects it back to us. And in that reflection, we can see our own lives and experiences as part of the larger human experience. Reading, then, becomes a means of self-affirmation, and readers often seek their mirrors in books. And so Bishop says that literature can serve as mirrors. I read a text where I can see myself or someone close to myself and receive that acknowledgement, receive that reflection. Literature can serve as windows in which I can see the lives of others who have experiences that I don't necessarily have. And then literature can also serve as sliding glass doors. So that literature allows me to connect to a point, to a point where I feel empathy for that particular person. I don't have that experience myself, but I can temporarily, in a limited capacity, experience what they are experiencing or feel what they feel when literature is used as a sliding glass door. So literature serves as a form of acknowledgement. What happens then when you don't see yourself ever, or you don't see your people ever reflected, then you're not being acknowledged. You don't feel that sense of belonging. You're not welcome if you're not getting that reflection from somewhere else. So it's power. So I'm curious, and some of you have already touched upon this. A few of you have already touched upon this, but I'm curious. What is your why for teaching Black literature? Because let's see how many people we have here. 6, 5, 4, really. Okay, so because it's such a small group, we're not going to do a breakout room. I'm just going to have people just unmute and share. But I want you to think about and openly discuss, we're using our spoken words, your reason or reasons for teaching African-American literature in general. Or if you've taught a specific text in the past, what was your reason for teaching that? If you're not coming from the teaching field, if you're coming from the librarian field, why is it important to bring those texts in and make sure that teachers include them in their classroom? So that's what we're talking about, our why, or our reasons or rationales for teaching or bringing in pieces of African-American literature. So
for me, it's access.
Mm-hmm.
When I grew up reading. My mom was an avid reader, and she regularly took me to the library with her, and I learned how to use the, back when, when I was little, we had you had the card catalog, and the books that were pushed at me, I didn't see me, once I got to, elementary school, middle school, you didn't see books with African American, student, with with Black kids on them. So for me, it's access. So I've been I've worked in elementary school library, middle school library, and I'm currently now at a high school library. And I make sure I go out of my way every year to buy a collection of diverse literature. It's not even just African American. We have a large Hispanic group of students at our school. So, you know, we both, my counterpart and I, we go out of our way to buy literature that represents everyone in our school. So, you know, when students come in, you know, it's always the Black males that are, a lot of them, you know, well, why do I want to come to the library? What do you have in here for me? So I try to go out of my way to find those books and those stories that'll reach them, that they will want to read. So for me, it's about access. It's just, I don't want my students to ever, you know, once they get older, to be like, where I never saw those books in our library. And I want them to know, you see a Black librarian when you walk in your library, and there are going to be books there for you as well. So that's my reason behind it.
Thank you, Raquel.
Well, to sort of piggyback off of what Ms. Barton was sharing, was that again, along with what she's saying, to generate the interest and pulling in the interest to the students and having them to see themselves. And I concur as far as with especially our African American males, how at times they honestly are not interested in literature, regardless of the content. But when they're able to see or read a piece that, like the quote you had up there from the bishop, that shows as far as, okay, here's a reflection to myself or of myself, then okay, well then maybe I just might want to tap in a little bit more into reading. And so my why, along with how she was sharing, I'm always looking, and even if it's the Sports Illustrated magazine, just what different articles or whatnot to generate an interest or desire to at least want to read, or to just try to get that niche of excitement formed with the love of reading.
Thank you.
This is Melissa, and I agree with the others on the Zoom, but I also, as a teacher, and then as well as an administrator, wanted not only to have that representation for us, but to broaden the minds of others, just not to see us in different capacities. Because I do have daughters and I have a son. So not to be surprised that they are in a professional field, or they are creative writing, or they are, just whatever, just to be, okay, this is the norm, and not the exception. So to have that diversity in the libraries, have it in the classrooms, have it up on the walls, and be able to have those conversations, and not, like I said, not that it would be an abnormal conversation. Don't be surprised when you have parents like me who walk into parent teacher conference every time, but being labeled as that helicopter parent versus that involved parent. So just having representation from that perspective, to broaden the minds of others, to and just like everyone else in the room has said, or on the Zoom has said, it's just not about African Americans. It's about everyone that, uh, you know, that there is diversity out there, but we need to make that a norm, and provide that equity as well. So that's why I love bringing that literature in, so it won't be a surprise. So when you walk out into the world, you're able to have those conversations and sit at the table and have conversations, and it won't be a surprise when you get into those positions that you've worked hard for.
Fantastic.
This is Larissa, and I echo pretty much everything that was said. As a school librarian, my quest this year for teaching and for promoting Black literature would be probably aimed at the people that create the lessons. There are some curriculum that is out there, especially in ELA, that I'm gonna throw, some people might like it, they might not, but Wit and Wisdom, they have components in theirs that, speak to a very diverse, poetry, the kids can hear all kinds of stuff. But then there are some places where, like my school, where teachers are searching for, they're looking for those connections. And ELA and probably beyond, it can jumpstart a science lesson to bring in a piece of literature that the kids can identify with. And I'm at a predominantly, African American population school. So my quest this year is to be able to pull out and to be able to try to promote for them some pieces that go along with their curriculum, because the more that the kids see it, hear it, and the more that they will probably gravitate toward it.
Fantastic, thank you. All right. Okay, so I conducted a study back in 2018, and among other questions, I asked various high school English teachers, why do they actually teach African American literature? What was their reason? What's their why? And they can give multiple reasons. And so their findings, the findings from that study, really do line up with much of what you've already said, which is fantastic. So the biggest group, 45% of the responses lined up with this quest to rebrand literature as all inclusive. So literature is not just white literature, white male literature, or white male authors. No, it's something that's all inclusive, has different shades, different voices, different experiences. And so it's talking about expanding the students' understanding of what literature actually is. And so people or teachers offered suggestions or comments like, I also considered it beneficial to expose students to a wide range of authors, including Black authors. Or I chose to be all inclusive with the material I teach in each class. Therefore, I go outside of the textbook in many instances to find a range of genres and authors. And this can line up with English, this can line up with any subject. And so when I say stories, I mean not just literature books. I'm talking about any stories that are presented in texts. So on poster, what faces are you seeing on posters? What faces are you seeing in textbooks? So all of these things contribute to representation. So all important. So that was the big group, literature as all inclusive. So there's more faces, more voices to be shared and seen. The next group was connecting with the African American students, African American student population. So 33% of the responses lined up with that. So bringing text to these students to connect them to themselves, connect them to their ancestors. So we have responses like, kids need to see representations of literature or art from individuals with whom they feel a cultural or ethnic connection. This is the reflection. The majority, 94% of my students were African American. I want them to hear voices that speak their truth and their experience. Okay, so that's the second level. The third level connects with something that you already said as well. 19% of the responses lined up with the teachers wanting the non-Black students to hear the Black voice of experience or to expand their understanding of these different experiences, to make this voice more of a norm rather than an exception. So helping white students in particular realize that other perspectives exist and matter. So we have examples like, I used each piece to facilitate conversations about life experiences with which many of my students could not identify in order to expand their world views. And the teacher who said this was teaching at a school where the population was a majority white. The second example is, for pieces by African-American writers that expressly discuss the experience of being Black in America, I think that white students need to hear these perspectives. So we have that literature being used as windows and perhaps sliding glass doors, allowing others to see and perhaps experience a different perspective and a different way of life or engaging with the world. So we've gone through the why. Okay, why is it? Why are we trying to expand? Why are we trying to secure the literature in these classrooms, or secure the representation rather in these classrooms? And so now let's talk action. How do we actually get this done? So again, we're going to forego the breakout room because this is small enough for us to talk right now. But the why, our why, often influences or informs our what's and our hows. So if you can speak from experience of teaching a certain type of literature or a certain text, what texts have you taught? Or what text do you have experience with? And did you approach it in any kind of pedagogical way, or was it, basically we're just talking about what experience do we have with this literature, especially with bringing it in front of students? And I'll start just to give you some clarity. When I was teaching, I think it was senior English, and for senior English at the time, for that school, the focus was on British literature. And so in the textbook, there weren't many texts speaking from Black voice. It was mostly just white authors, mostly white male authors. But there was one text, an excerpt from Olaudah Equiano's narrative, slave narrative. So I decided to bring that text in, a different excerpt than what was in the book. But I brought that text in and I paired it up with Daniel Defoe's Journal of the Plague Year, an excerpt from that. So using two excerpts. But with these texts, one written by an African in England rather than African American, and then one written by an English person. We talked about how each captured or recreated their experiences using their words. So we focused on logos, pathos, and ethos, how the authors created credibility, how they created emotion and imagery, and included facts and figures and whatnot, depending on their story. And so we came to those texts, examining them on the same level as writer's craft, but at the same time with Olaudah Equiano's text, we talked about the experience of traveling through that Middle Passage, transatlantic slave trade. So it was a little bit of a history lesson at the same time. So what texts have you taught, or what texts do you have experience with? What Black texts, whether African-American or like Olaudah Equiano, it's not American, it's more African England, African British.
Dr. Price, this is Melissa. I'm going to step out and just be vulnerable and say In that capacity, I have not had those experiences in quite some time. But what I do now is that I advocate for highly instructional materials and make sure that not only does every student have access, but that we make sure that there is representation across the board when the textbook adoptions come up in school districts. And so how we go about that is having the conversations not only at the local level, but at the state level as well. And I understand that critical race theory is a buzzword, but that's not what we're trying to convey. We're trying to convey that representation across the board is given access to every student. That means that if there is um, and I'm just going to use some terms that may be, I'll just say in the underrepresented populations. We want to make sure that they have the same quality of materials of those that may be in some of the more affluent parts of town, that access is accessible across the board. So that's kind of what I do now. And I can say that there have been great conversations, and I'm just glad that I signed up and I'm a part of this session with everyone that's in the room, because media specialists, librarians, they're the core, because they really ignite, and I constantly use that word, but they I'm just at a loss of words, but they have such an influence on every student in the building to have that love of reading and to be able to draw them into the library. That's huge. You know, they can do things that not even the classroom teachers can do. So having that equity and that access to those materials, even in the libraries, are very important. So I'm just being vulnerable to say, you know, I couldn't do that comparison to the literature like you, and I admire that.
We speak through our experiences, and thank you for your response. So let me ask you this, and this might apply to other folks as well. So how do you select the literature that you want to bring in to expand that representation?
This is Alexandria. I have actually kind of used some, for instance, when I was teaching 7th grade English, we kind of figured out that our students were having a hard time understanding the standard theme, and that was something they were going to be tested on. So we wanted to make sure they understood that concept. Well, it was a predominantly Black school, so we thought that it would be better to probably use some more like Black literature, which of course was fine with me. So we did a lot of folk tales, for instance, The People Who Could Fly, and that centers around a lot of finding the theme or the moral in the story. And so that actually helped them understand and how to get the theme out of a story. And they ended up doing really well testing on that actually increased them. So that's one thing that I did, was I incorporated in there to try to get them to, and it just really engaged them. They were really interested in, like, oh wow, these people really could fly, and they wanted to figure out what was going on, and they loved the bunny and the bear rabbit. Like, they really were intrigued by it. And the fact that it was like written by people like them, about them, really, really engaged them. So that was one instance where I was able to bring African literature in, and I saw how it really impacted the classroom and impacted the students' learning.
That is fantastic. Marvelous. Thank you. Anyone else to speak through your experiences, whether it aligns with that question or not?
One book that my teachers, my ninth grade teachers use at the
Yeah.
beginning of every school year is Long Way Down by Jason Reynolds. They've been, our students kind of, or probably a lot of our students kind of fell in love with that book right after it came out. I guess it's been like 2 or 3 years ago since that, since he published that book. But after, I want to say one of our English teachers read it, she kind of introduced it to the other English teachers, and we just bought like a mass collection of it, and now all of our ninth grade students read it. It's like a summer, they read it during the summer, and then they come back and they do like discussions and stuff. It's like the first book they talk about during the first part of the school year.
Nice. Thank you. Thank you, Raquel. Anyone else? Okay, so we got a mixture. So we got some folk tales. We have Long Way Down. I used to teach, well, through the survey or through the study I did, a lot of teachers taught Langston Hughes poetry. I taught a few of those, a few of his poems as well. I also taught an excerpt from MLK's letter from Birmingham jail, and so on and so forth. But I tried to do what I could, and a little bit of James Baldwin. I'm more on short stories. I'm big on bringing in more short stories and poetry, because that is one way that I can bring in more voices and more experiences. So, and then I have my own personal classroom library where students can read their own, select a novel of their choice, or book or nonfiction of their choice, and go from there when we do independent reading. All right. Fantastic. Fantastic is one of my go-to words, almost like ignite is Melissa's word. So let's, all right. So here's something that I try to do, or I tried to do when I was still in the classroom, and this is something that I encourage when I have the opportunity to do so, because I think that it's going to be one way of supporting teachers who don't feel as secure in teaching Black literature because of how they conceptualize it. But think about, you're taking a picture of a flower garden, you're looking at it. And at first glance, it's zoomed out. You can see the different flowers spread across the landscape, but bees buzzing by, so on and so forth. And then you decide to zoom in a little bit more on just one particular subsection. And from this zoomed in frame, you can see some details that you weren't able to see before. The water accumulation, little bugs crawling around, decay, new growth, so on and so forth. However, if you never zoomed out, if that zoomed in frame was where you always stayed, then that frame will become your complete understanding of that garden. It's just that picture, that little set there. Completely losing the whole picture, the whole landscape, and how that particular flower interacts with the environment and with the flowers around it. Likewise, if you never zoomed in and you were always out taking in the whole landscape, then yes, you would get the big picture, but you would lose out on those individual details. So this bifocal approach that I'll briefly discuss is going to be taking both of those frames together. So sometimes folks who are not familiar with Black literature see it from that zoomed in perspective. They say a Black text and Black author text, and so I have to talk about slavery, race, and some history that makes me uncomfortable, or some history that I don't really know about. And because I don't know about that, because I feel uncomfortable about it, I'm not really going to teach it very well or teach it at all. Meanwhile, you have other folks who will bring in African American literature, have acknowledged that I don't feel comfortable or I don't know enough about the history or talking about race, that I'm just going to speak from a very broad perspective, and talking about writer's craft or whatever the case, and not even mention the fact that the person is Black. Well, seems to be the case in our society that when an author is unacknowledged, as the race is unacknowledged, then it's going to be understood as being white. So the literature becomes whitewashed because of that. So my idea, my theory is to combine these two approaches. So to allow folks to be able to focus in on the fact that it is written by a Black author. It can be set in this time, this very culturally specific context. But at the same time, that's not all that it is. It is more than that, and we can approach it from a literary standpoint, talking about writer's craft, so on and so forth. Similar to how I did with Olaudah Equiano's text. We talked about the transatlantic slave trade, Middle Passage, but we also talked about Olaudah Equiano's skill as a writer and how the different things that he put in there to convey emotion and to persuade his readers because it served a certain purpose, his text. So it's that bifocal approach, being able to zoom in and zoom out on things that are culturally specific, but also more universal in a way. And the benefit of this type of approach, one, it brings dimension to the representation of Black literature and Black lives. Because what this does, it expands Black literature beyond talks of race, injustice, slavery, etc. Those are important, of course, but there's also another life outside of that. So it's important to be able to acknowledge this history, but also be able to acknowledge the present and the future. Okay, I am a product of slavery, but I'm also a product of excellence. And I'm also a product of other things. So it's important to be able to acknowledge this expanded view of self, this expanded acknowledgement of identities. And then also, third bullet, this approach will welcome Black literature in which race is a characteristic, not a focus. So there are some pieces of Black literature that are strong pieces. They have Black characters, but they are not limited to a talk of race, injustice, or slavery. The characters simply happen to be Black. And so you get to see a different experience. These people are not bound to talk about civil rights and striving for justice, but simply are living their lives, have friends, they're in high school, so on and so forth. And all of that allows expanded pairings. So you don't have to link one Black text to another Black text, one talk of slavery with another one talk of civil injustice with another one talking about civil injustice. It expands and allows greater presence. And I'll give you a couple of examples so you can see it in action. So there's a short story, Gorilla My Love by Toni Cade Bambara. And if you're not familiar with the short story, I'll give you a brief rundown. And there's a picture of Toni at the bottom there. So it's told from the perspective of a young Black female protagonist. She's in the car traveling with family, and we go through a flashback where she goes to the movie theater with her siblings, and she goes to see a movie that's advertised as Gorilla My Love. So just from that title itself, it sounds like it's going to be a love story, maybe even involving a gorilla. Okay, I got my expectations set. When she goes in, it's nothing completely related to it. It's a completely different movie. And so she gets upset with this deception, which connects to the present where she's telling the story. Her uncle kind of goes against his word of marrying her when she grows up. So it's dealing with growing up. It's dealing with these disappointments, the power or the value of words, names, so on and so forth. Okay. And in this text, race, the race of the character is just a characteristic. It's not a driving factor. So with this particular text, we have multiple things, multiple topics we can pick out, things of childhood, the importance of names, the value of words, disappointment, reactions to change, so on and so forth. These themes or these topics then lend themselves to be paired, for the text to be paired to another text, other texts. If you're familiar with Everyday Use, another short story by Alice Walker, African-American author, that'll work very well because Alice Walker's short story goes more in depth in terms of the importance of names and naming, and really, and this one connects it more to how a name connects you more to your identity, more to your heritage. So in Everyday Use, you have that more of that race-focused, racial-focused lens. You go to The House on Mango Street, this Gorilla My Love can also connect to The House on Mango Street because both are dealing with the growing up and the realizations of the young female protagonist. And so The House on Mango Street has an extended look into a girl or womanhood and the memories and the memories and emotions associated with that. So we have some betrayal, we have some disappointment, we have some memories, just like in Gorilla My Love. We have that link. And if you want it, link it with Adventures of Huckleberry Finn, based on the protagonist, young protagonist working his way through the world and is brutally honest about things and it pairs pretty well with Gorilla My Love. Are they identical? Are any of these texts identical to Gorilla My Love? No, there's no need for the text to be identical. You don't want to teach the same thing. What you want, however, is to find a way to bridge one text to the other. And the more you can bridge one text to the other, then the more you can expand your territory, your reading territory, your students' reading territory. And then we have another, this one's graphic novel, March, book 1, and focuses on the life of Congressman John Lewis. And he's sharing his experiences and growing up, fighting for civil rights, goes through various moments, Brown versus Board, the murder of Emmett Till. So there is definitely a racial focus here, social justice focus, and there's nothing wrong with that. It's important to be acknowledged for sure. So let's see what themes we can extract from it and what texts can connect to it. So we have things like resistance, nonviolence, the element of flashback, growing up, civil rights, making life decisions, bearing witness to history, society, or the norms in society. And so with this, we can link to Harrison Bergeron, which is another short story. Again, I like short stories, by Kurt Vonnegut. And in this particular short story, we have a society in which everyone is forced to be equal. So that means that if anyone has an advantage, they are equipped with some kind of device or weights or something that brings them down to the status quo. So if you're a fast runner, you're going to be tied down to some weights. If you have a pretty face, you're going to have to wear something on your face to deform it, whatever the case. And so the protagonist rebels against this system and is seen as a troublemaker. So lines up with that resistance. You also have the Journal of the Plague Year, which I mentioned before with Olado Equiano. But it's dealing with that bearing witness to what's happened in history, bringing in details so that readers from a different time can actually understand what's going on or what happened during this time. And you can also bring in, of course, Letter from Birmingham Jail, which goes into more depth, providing more details about nonviolent resistance, civil disobedience, so on and so forth. So again, being flexible enough and comfortable enough with the literature, with how we see the literature, to be able to bridge to texts that have that that share that racial focus, and to also texts that share other commonalities, whether it's through other themes or craft, what have you. So it's all about just expanding that mindset, how we conceptualize Black literature. So whatever the case, when it's all said and done, many stories do matter. So bringing in as many texts as we can to provide that access, to provide that opportunity to be transformed, to provide that opportunity for students to understand how other folks live, see through those windows, to see themselves reflected in those mirrors. So we also have to consider, what stories are we telling in our classrooms when we're doing that? What stories are we bringing in, and how are we telling those stories? Moving forward, I have 2 links for you if you are interested. And I think you will be, because these are nice. So 2 links. So for middle school, if you're interested in finding some middle school and high school suggestions for books, there's a link that an independent bookstore shared with me, and it's out of Knoxville, and it's providing a list. I'm going to copy and paste this list into the chat. Let's see. Copy. Okay. But let me put it in the chat right now so I won't forget. So if you go to this, then you'll be able to see what you're seeing now. Scroll down to the bottom. They've been kind enough, the bottom bookstore has been kind enough to share a list of books for middle school readers, and also young adults, so maybe high school readers as well. 76 books. And you click them and it'll take you, click one, it'll take you, of course, to a description, including some reviews, a little bit about the author as well. So if you are indeed looking for some more examples of literature to present to teachers, then this might be a good place to start. Also, if you are interested in the literary pairings that I was going through, both with Gorilla My Love and March, I have a PDF that has more connections, literary connections within it. And so I'll show you what that looks like in case you are interested in supporting teachers making those pairings. So it's going to be very similar to what I just went through, but there's going to be a collection of short stories, novels, nonfiction pieces, poetry, graphic novels as well. So I have a short story, or in this case, a short story, synopsis, themes and topics, and then related text and how those texts relate. So that's in case you are interested. And in order to access that, I'll copy and paste that, or you could just go to drpriceteaches.com, either way. So I'll copy and paste that text or that link right there. So those are two resources that are designed to support you in your ongoing journey to promote access and encourage acknowledgement and presence in the classroom. If you are interested in keeping in contact with me, my information is right there. You can email me at vprice@uca.edu. vprice@uca.edu, or you can follow me on Instagram at Dr. Price Teaches. I also have a YouTube channel and a podcast of the same name, Dr. Price Teaches, if you are interested in either of those. Okay, so feel free. I value feedback. So any feedback that you can provide for me, or any further ideas for additional workshops that you can provide for me, so I can be more of use to the professionals in the field. Feel free to shoot me an email or a message, let me know, because I want to be of service. So that is it. So as we wrap up, I want to remind you that if you are interested in pursuing an advanced degree or even a certificate, the University of Central Arkansas offers some programs online through the College of Education, and they also offer scholarships. And so if you go to uca.edu/education, you can go to find that information there. And if you add an additional slash and type in scholarships, that should lead you to a place where they are discussing scholarships. Okay, so I thank you, and I believe you should be receiving your certificate pretty soon, like within the next 2 days or so. I thank you for participating. I thank you for sharing with me your experience and your whys. And I wish you the best as you continue to move forward with that why. So thank you. Have a good evening.